Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we bring you some of the biggest stories that made the headlines this week. I'm your new host, Yoo-jin, here at Arirang's new virtual studio. President Yoon Suk Yeol, now in his third year in office, resumed his policy discussions with citizens this week. The 25th session, the first to be held since the general election last month, focused on the president reiterating his commitment to completing his 4 major reforms in education, labor, national pensions, and medical services. Moving on, a more optimistic forecast for the domestic economy. South Korea's state-run economic think tank has increased the country's growth forecast for this year from 2.2% in February to 2.6%, citing robust experts. Finally, Russian President Vladimir Putin has chosen China for his first overseas visit since beginning his 5th term in office. During his 2-day trip, he held talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping, where the two leaders issued a joint statement opposing what they called intimidation by the United States and its allies against North Korea. We start this week on the domestic front. After nearly a 50-day break, President Yoon Suk Yeol resumed his policy discussions with citizens on Tuesday. President Yoon emphasized his commitment to completing his 4 major reforms and discussed ways to protect vulnerable workers in the labor market. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
After nearly a 50-day pause from policy discussions with citizens because of the elections, President Yoon returned to these meetings on Tuesday, immediately showing his motivation to finish off his 4 major reform priorities in the medical, education, pension, and labor sectors, despite strong resistance from vested interests.
뭔가를 빼앗기는 쪽에서는 정말 정권 퇴진 운동을 하게 되는 겁니다. 그래서 정말 어떤 개혁을 해 나간다는 것이 대단히 어렵습니다. 그렇지만 그런 정치적 유불리를 따지지 않고 제가 제 임기 동안 반드시 문제를 짚고 넘어가야 되겠다.
Such comments come against the backdrop of a prolonged standoff with doctors who oppose the government's medical reform plan, which aims to increase the enrollment quota for medical schools, leading to more medical practitioners. Meanwhile, today's policy discussion centered on protecting vulnerable workers, with the president meeting non-union workers such as those in the delivery and construction fields, and even artists. Yoon vowed that his government would speed up labor reform to tackle polarization due to market segmentation. He also discussed how the country can better care for the marginalized self-employed and freelancers, such as pushing for a new law.
이 법은 미조직 근로자들이 질병, 상해, 실업을 겪었을 때 경제적으로 도움을 받을 수 있는 공제회 설치를 지원하고 또 노동 약자들이 분쟁을 조속히 해결하고 제대로 보호받을 수 있도록 분쟁 조정 협의회 설치를 담고 있습니다.
In addition, the president said it was time for the country to consider a court dealing solely with labor cases, both criminal and civil, so that they can be all handled under one system. He ordered his aides to begin work so that the relevant legal basis could be determined before the end of his term.
이런 체불 임금이라든가 이런 노동자들의 피해 또 더 큰 이슈들이 종합적으로 다뤄질 수 있는 노동법원의 설치가 이제는 우리가 적극 검토할 단계가 이제 됐다고 봅니다.
President Yoon also said that today's event kicked off season 2 of his policy discussions, hinting that the presidential office will resume meeting citizens in different regions nationwide and those involved in various industries. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And also this week, President Yoon held a summit with Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet at the Yongsan presidential office on Thursday. The two countries agreed to elevate their bilateral relations to a strategic partnership and strengthen cooperation in areas such as naval exchanges, combating transnational crimes, and establishing a special economic zone. Here's our Kim Do-yeon once again.
South Korea and Cambodia are now officially strategic partners, paving the way to strengthen economic and security cooperation. The announcement came following a summit between the two countries' leaders as President Yoon Suk Yeol on Thursday hosted Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet at his office.
지금 현재 아세안 지역에서 가장 빠르게 성장하고 있는 국가인 캄보디아와 교역, 투자 협력을 확대하고 디지털 환경과 같은 미래지향적 분야에서의 협력 강화도 기대하고 있습니다.
Prime Minister Hun Manet agreed about the bright future, saying his visit to Seoul will lay the foundations for success while also showing appreciation for the aid given by South Korea so far.
Mr. President, Cambodia's socio-economic achievements we are witnessing today are inseparable from the Republic of Korea's invaluable contributions across various sectors, including economy, infrastructure, health, education, and rural developments.
The two leaders also adopted a joint statement detailing the enhanced cooperation leading to the signing of 6 MOUs. Some key aspects in security include enhancing naval exchanges, with South Korea planning to make its first port call in Cambodia this year, and tackling transnational crimes together, including drug trafficking, people smuggling, cybercrime, and scam operations. For economic cooperation, the two nations are looking to set up a special economic zone.
They have proposed a plan to establish a special economic zone exclusively for Korean companies. The Prime Minister said, "Let's develop a plan that will allow Korean auto companies to freely conduct their business activities through this special economic zone."
In terms of the official development assistance, the two agreed to expand the Economic Development Cooperation Fund for the years 2022 through 2030 to $3 billion, twice more than what was previously agreed. The enhanced cooperation comes with it being 27 years since the re-establishment of diplomatic ties and with accumulated exchanges accelerating. In fact, the Korea-Cambodia FTA has surpassed $10 billion of trade, and it only came into effect in November 2022. In the meantime, at the luncheon was First Lady Kim Gun-hee resuming official engagements after leaving the public scene last December following news of her accepting a luxury bag as a gift. First Lady Kim has a special connection with a young Cambodian she met during the president's ASEAN summit trip in 2022. Aok Rotha, a then 14-year-old, was invited to Seoul by the First Lady to receive the heart surgery he required as he wasn't able to receive proper care due to his family's economic situation. Prime Minister Hun Manet personally thanked the president and his wife and said this was one of the most important examples of the bilateral exchanges. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And now to the standoff between the Korean government and doctors. The first expansion to the country's medical school admissions quota in 27 years is likely to pick up speed, with the Seoul High Court on Thursday rejecting an injunction filed by doctors and medical students to stop the government's plan. Our Choi Soo-hyung explains what this decision means.
The Seoul High Court on Thursday rejected an application submitted by medical students, exam candidates, professors and trainee doctors to halt the government's plan to expand the number of new medical students by 2,000 starting in 2025. Right after, the government said it respects the court's opinion, while trainee doctors announced that they will not return to their post regardless of the outcome. The court ruled that medical school professors, trainee doctors and exam candidates are not the parties involved in the lawsuit and dismissed their claims. Regarding medical students, while they are considered as a party, the court rejected their claims due to concerns of significant implications on public welfare. This court's decision is pivotal, as now government can enter the final stages of its medical reform plan. During the prolonged dispute, the medical community filed over 20 lawsuits to the court, but all applications were rejected in the first instance. On April 30th, the Seoul High Court requested specific evidence from the government regarding the increase of 2,000 to the med school quota within the appeal filed by the medical community. The medical community continued to argue that the meeting to discuss the quota was too brief, lasting just an hour, and was nothing more than a formal act to confirm the number brought by the government. Last week, the government submitted approximately 50 items of documented evidence. This included research reports which were used as the basis for the quota number itself, as well as meeting records from the Medical School Quota Allocation Committee. Ahead of the final decision, the Culture Ministry released the results of a public opinion poll showing that over 70% of the population supported an expansion of the medical school admission quota. As the government won the second trial, all eyes are on whether the medical community will appeal to set up a third trial. However, it seems that this is not scheduled to take place until at least mid-June, while the official admission guides for each university will be finalized by this month. Choi Hyung, Arirang News.
Now, shifting gears, some good news on the economic front. The Korea Development Institute, one of the country's major economic think tanks, has revised its economic growth outlook for this year upward from its previous forecast in February. This improvement is attributed to a recovery in exports, especially in the semiconductor sector. Our economic correspondent Yoo-jin has the details.
A South Korean state-run economic think tank expects higher economic growth on the back of rising exports. In its outlook published on Thursday, the Korea Development Institute forecast the economy to grow by 2.6% this year. That's up from its previous forecast of 2.2% released in February, an estimate that was unchanged from its November 2023 report. This upward adjustment comes as exports have shown a recovery led by the strong demand for semiconductors. Preliminary data released by the Bank of Korea on Tuesday showed that the nation's export price index was up by 4.1% on month in April, rising for the fourth consecutive month. And compared to a year ago, it jumped 6.2%. But despite the rise in exports, concerns remain about sluggish consumption as consumer prices remain high. The think tank is forecasting that consumer prices will go up 2.6% this year. April was the first time since January that the Consumer Price Index, a key gauge of inflation, fell below 3% after consumer prices saw on-year increases of 3.1% in February and March. And while the downturn in domestic demand is expected to ease next year, the economy is expected to grow at a slightly lower rate of 2.1% as the rise in exports slow.
Exports of goods rose 5.3% in 2024 on the back of increased demand for chips, and while this trend is largely expected to continue, export growth is being estimated to be adjusted down to 2.3%.
But consumer prices are expected to fall to 2.1% in 2025, close to the Bank of Korea's target inflation of 2%. However, if the global economy does not show the same steady growth it saw in 2023, then domestic economic growth could be limited. The International Monetary Fund is forecasting the global economy to grow 3.2% both this year and next year. The report also added that other external factors such as hikes in international oil prices due to geopolitical tensions and China's sluggish real estate market may impact South Korea's economy. Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Moving on to our weekly focus, South Korean online platform giant Naver has been facing pressure from the Japanese government to sell its shares in Tokyo-based LINE Yahoo, the operator of Japan's popular messaging app. And it no longer seems to be just a business issue. For more, we are joined by our business correspondent, Park Gun-woo. Welcome, Gun-woo.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Gun-woo, so I want to first ask you, how has this LINE issue expanded to a political and also a diplomatic problem?
So Yoo-jin, first of all, the Japanese government gave administrative guidance to LINE Yahoo twice in 2024, advising it to reorganize its shareholding structure in order to prevent security issues. Japan's main concern is a Korean company having access as a shareholder to the personal information of Japanese users of LINE due to a data leak last year, making it a political issue here in South Korea. Opposition parties criticized the government for taking a passive attitude instead of speaking up for a Korean company, while the ruling People Power Party said opposition parties were driving anti-Japanese sentiment. Since then, the government has delivered a stronger message, saying that it would do all that it can to support Naver.
The government's response has so far reflected Naver's position as much as possible, and it will continue to support Naver with any future developments. We will respond firmly and strongly to unfair measures that go against a Korean company's stance.
Right, so this has been the Korean government's response. So how has Japan reacted to this issue?
Actually, on Tuesday, the Japanese government reiterated that its aim is to prevent similar cases from happening again, but also said reorganization of the shareholding structure is still on the agenda. One expert shared his thoughts on why Japan issued the administrative guidance.
Expectations that the Japanese shareholder would become the majority shareholder over Naver led to a sudden rise of 7% in the approval rating for the Japanese government.
He added it could be part of a political strategy by Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and the ruling party to extend their terms after the elections later this year.
Right, so Kanu, could you tell us a bit more about this Line case? Like, walk us through.
Of course, Yoo-jin. So if you take a look at the screen, Line Yahoo's major shareholder, A Holdings, is a joint venture between Naver and Japan's SoftBank with an even split of 50-50. And that's quite unusual, as joint ventures usually proportion shares in order to avoid a situation where one firm could take full control. One other thing is that the messenger app Line is popular among Japanese people with a total of around 96 million users, meaning 8 out of 10 Japanese people are using this app. And Line has been expanding its business to become a provider of news, music, digital payment, and more. In November last year, there was a personal information leak involving more than 500,000 users. As a result, Japan directed Line Yahoo in March to review its capital relationship with Naver to prevent it from happening again. Though Naver responded with a report containing preventive measures, Japan gave administrative guidance for an unprecedented second time in April. So Naver has to submit a report again to the Japanese government by July 1st. That's different from what happened with Nippon Telegraph and Telephone Corporation, or NTT, which had a leak on a much larger scale with over 9 million users affected between 2013 and 2023. In that case, the Japanese government accepted improvement measures proposed by NTT.
I see. So wrapping up, I think Konu, eyes are on what Naver's next moves will be. So are there any predictions as well as concerns?
So Yoo-jin, Naver is now open to all possibilities, including selling shares to SoftBank. So we'll have to wait and see if the company will actually do so. Pundits say Naver's value within Line Yahoo is around 8 trillion won, or over $5.8 billion US, and a sale would allow Naver to invest in the AI sector, where they have been recently focusing. Naver's labor union expressed concern over job cuts and the loss of company tech and know-how if it sells. But the government recently said selling shares will not be included in the report to be submitted in July, meaning Naver has some more time to consider the issue. And apart from that, an expert said selling shares can actually cause a bigger problem.
This could become a precedent of Japanese firms exploiting Korean firms' technology, which can happen again and again, and it can actually intensify anti-Korean sentiment.
He was also concerned about Naver having to give up its services not only in Japan, but also in other regions such as Southeast Asia. The expert added if Naver's case does become a precedent, it will not be helpful for Japan either, as there's the possibility that firms from other countries will be wary about creating joint ventures with Japanese companies.
All right, I think that we'll just have to wait and see on how the situation will unfold. All right, Konyu, thank you so much for your report today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Now, staying with the economy, there was a bit of relief this week for consumers in the United States as inflation showed signs of easing last month. According to the U.S. Labor Department's report on Wednesday, the Consumer Price Index, a key measure of inflation, climbed 3.4% in April compared to the same period last year. Now, that's 0.1 percentage points lower than in March and the first easing of the upward trend this year. While prices of groceries, cars, utilities, and electricity showed signs of cooling, inflation remains still stubborn in rent and eating out. But despite decreasing from its peak in June 2022, when the CPI reached its highest level since 1981 at 9.1%, April's figure is still above the Federal Reserve's target rate of 2%.
We've stated that we do not expect that it will be appropriate to reduce the target range for the federal funds rate until we have gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%.
Now, analysts suggest that Wednesday's inflation report would have given confidence to the Fed that it can begin to cut rates. However, it's unlikely that rate cuts will occur in the near future, as the central bank is likely to wait for further inflation readings to ensure sustained improvement. And reflecting these higher hopes for a possible rate cut, the Dow Jones Industrial Average passed the 40,000 mark during intraday trading for the first time on Thursday. Now, this milestone was reached less than 3.5 years after the index topped 30,000. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Amid optimism over a possible rate cut in the near future due to positive inflation data released earlier in the week, the U.S. stock market responded well to start Thursday's trading session. Despite the trading day ending with losses throughout the major indexes, the Dow Jones Industrial Average reached the 40,000 mark for the first time ever during intraday trading. The Dow Jones ended the trading day at 39,869, down 0.1% from the previous trading day. The Dow surpassed the 10,000 mark for the first time in March 1993 and the 20,000 mark in January 2017. While it took 24 years to double its figure during that time, it only took 7 years to rise from the 20,000 level to the 40,000 level and less than 3.5 years to go from 30,000 to 40,000. The Wall Street Journal on Thursday evaluated the recent milestone, saying that when the U.S. Fed began raising interest rates about 2 years ago to cool down the overheating economy, the Dow Jones surpassing the 40,000 mark seemed like it would be difficult to achieve. However, it said companies increased jobs, people continued to spend, and inflation cooled. More than anything, the economic recession predicted by many economists did not come to fruition, giving investors hope that stock prices would continue to rise. It added that the rapid rise of large tech stocks due to the development of artificial intelligence was also a factor in revitalizing the market. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is one of the 3 major indexes in the U.S. stock market, consisting of 30 blue-chip stocks representing major U.S. industries. The weighted average of stocks is calculated based on stock prices rather than market capitalization. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Shifting focus, during his 2-day visit to China, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Thursday. The two leaders signed a joint statement backing North Korea and saying that they're against U.S. military actions toward the regime. Shin Se-byuk reports.
Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin have expressed their opposition to military intimidation by the United States and its allies towards North Korea. The statement came after their summit meeting in Beijing, where the two leaders signed a joint statement on Thursday. Putin's visit to Beijing marks his first foreign trip since beginning his 5th term last week and highlights the growing importance of China-Russia relations. This is the 4th meeting between the two leaders since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. In the joint statement, Xi and Putin condemned the military threats and confrontations by the U.S. and its allies, which they said heightened tensions on the Korean peninsula. They urged the U.S. to de-escalate military tensions and abandon the use of sanctions. The two leaders also agreed to deepen military trust and cooperation, expand joint exercises, and regularly conduct combined sea and air patrols to strengthen military collaboration. Later that day, the two heads of state held a restrictive meeting for an in-depth discussion on strategic issues of common concern, particularly regarding the ongoing war in Ukraine. President Xi emphasized the need for a new security framework in relation to the Ukraine war and reiterated Beijing's commitment to a political settlement of the crisis. He also expressed support for an international peace conference at an appropriate time. Regarding the recent Putin-Xi summit, the U.S. criticized China's stance, saying Beijing, quote, cannot have its cake and eat it too when it comes to its relationship with Russia.
You can't want to have good, further, stronger, deepened relationships with Europe and other countries while simultaneously continuing to fuel the biggest threat to European security in a long time.
The White House also brushed off Moscow and Beijing's reaffirmation of ties. In a briefing on Thursday, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said that the Biden administration doesn't see anything new in the joint statement. The summit between the Chinese and Russian leaders comes as Moscow has become more dependent on Beijing. With China refusing to condemn the war in Ukraine and with increasing sanctions from the United States and its allies on Russia, deepening cooperation between the two historic powerhouses means relations with the U.S. are likely to become even more tense. 신세벽, Arirang News.
And days before the Putin-Xi summit, the top diplomats of South Korea and China met for the first time in 2 years in Beijing. Seoul's Foreign Minister Yoo Tae-yeol had a 4-hour meeting with Wang Yi, the director of the Office of China's Central Commission for Foreign Affairs, where the two agreed on stronger communication and cooperation. Kim Jong-sil has more.
Foreign Minister Yoo Tae-yeol met with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi on Monday in Beijing. His 2-day trip to China came at the invitation of Wang, the director of the Office of China's Central Commission for Foreign Affairs. Minister Cho said to open up a new era for Seoul and Beijing, it was important to build a foundation for sustainable development by improving mutual trust. He said the two countries must continue developing a strategic partner relationship based on mutual respect, benefit, and common interest. Director Wang said the two countries established each other as strategic partners in 2008, giving each other more important diplomatic positions. But he pointed out that difficulties and challenges have increased since then and proposed to work together face-to-face to promote a healthy and stable relationship without interference. In the 4-hour meeting, the two discussed issues of mutual concern such as the situation on the Korean peninsula, including the North Korean nuclear threat, as well as semiconductor supply chains. Foreign Minister Cho also invited Director Wang to visit Seoul, which he agreed to do.
You can tell that the two sides tried to create an atmosphere by avoiding provocative words, and it can be read that the two sides were using the opportunity of high-level talks to create new momentum for bilateral relations.
The meeting between the two foreign ministers came ahead of a trilateral summit between Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing scheduled for later this month. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Now that wraps up weekly news highlights for this third week of May. Thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of the weekend.